I literally just tried to sync this video without it recording. Let's leave that in.
There we go.
All right, now we can sync.
Now it works.
Last time we did this here was London, wasn't it?
Or was it? Yeah, because that was January.
Because that was
right.
after Oslo. So we did this in London in Jan. We're going to do this one this week, probably next 2 weeks. Definitely next week. You're here next week.
Yes, before Gold Coast.
Before NDC Gold Coast. So we are on the Gold Coast in my backyard at the moment. Scott's visiting. You can't see it, but he's like totally bitten by insects and things like that.
Everything eats me.
Which is kind of hilarious from my perspective. But be that as it may, we're here for NDC security. So it's the building's just like that way, just a little bit. But we're a few minutes walk from there, which is
pretty nice.
Which is a better commute than the events we normally go to. So we'll do NDC security. What day will that make? That'll be, because we're actually doing this on a Thursday. So 29th.
A week on Monday, right?
Yeah, so 29th, 30th, and it's the 30th of month, isn't it? So the 1st of May as well. Yeah. So we're doing NDC security here. We've still got a bunch of tickets. We're both doing workshops.
Yep.
We've got normal conferencey stuff. And then week after, I'm going to Minnesota. So I'm doing NDC Minnesota. You're going to Cyber somewhere else?
Yeah, Cybering in Poland.
Okay, right, Poland. So I'll be in Minnesota and then New York the next week as well. And then you'll be back here to the building next door to do OzCert.
I didn't time this well.
They didn't time this well at all. A few weeks later. And then we'll both be back in London to do Info Security Europe and NDC Oslo and all sorts of things in the European summer, which is always very nice. So when we do these together, like there's sort of stuff that we can both do. Part of that includes usually drinking beer when we do these, which is just fine. Works good for me. Part of it also is there's a couple of things that are normally sort of right up your alley that I think are good to chat about. And the first one, this came up the other day. In fact, I made a note of this like more than a week ago because I was like, this will be a good argument for us to have. And you'll see where we're going. The argument was, maybe it's not an argument, I don't know, we'll see. It was around, it had to do with security.txt. So security.txt being literally just the text file you put on your website, and it has information about how to do vulnerability disclosure, often there's a public key, who do you contact for security and stuff like that. Super, super cool, dead simple. It should be on every website because it's really cool. Now, the caveats to this. So someone was asking me why I don't have it for TroyHunt.com. I do have it for Have I Been... We'll get to that. Crap. I do have it for Have I Been Pwned. If you go to haveibeennpwned.com/.well-known/security.txt, you'll see it there. I'm going to link to stuff with more info about security.txt as well. Someone said, why don't you have it on TroyHunt.com? And my first answer, and it's a... To be honest, probably the easiest answer is that...
Cop-out is the word you're looking for.
No, it's not cop-out. All right, so TroyHunt.com runs on Ghost Pro. So Ghost is a managed platform. It's literally software as a service. I don't do anything with the software other than upload a template. The entire running of the platform is Ghost's responsibility. And this is where I was wrong on one thing, but to the best of my knowledge, there wasn't the ability to upload an arbitrary text file and load it from the file system, or I just hadn't really thought through it. I had previously done that as well as a whole bunch of security headers with Cloudflare workers so that when the request comes in, response comes back through Cloudflare Edge node, they drop on content security policies and stuff. And then the way Ghost and Cloudflare integrate, and at least natively that ability dropped. You've done tricks to reverse, I don't even know what you've done, other things. Anyway, I think the more philosophical question came around, do you need things like a security.txt file and a CSP when it's a managed platform that's someone else's responsibility to run? Now, I'll stop talking for a bit and you can give your 2 cents on it, because in fairness, I'm not completely emphatic either way, but I can see both arguments.
Well, I mean, for the CSP, I think the clue's kind of in the name, right? It's content security policy, so it's... it doesn't matter who hosts the platform, the CSP is required and dictated by the content of the page. So I think you can always break that away from the platform provider, because if you write your own custom theme, for example, which you and I both have on Ghost, then they have no idea what assets you're pulling in, what should and shouldn't be there. So I think we can always break CSP out into the responsibility of the person who owns the content. And we did have a little bit of back and forth about security.txt, because that is... there's an argument for that both ways, right? It's like if it's a hosted platform by Ghost and they're taking care of everything and someone finds an issue, it's probably going to be an issue with the Ghost application, in which case they would probably want to speak to Ghost.
Yeah.
However, the flip side is like, what if you screwed up your DNS, or you've got a subdomain leak, or you're CNAMing off to like an S3 bucket that's gone and someone's grabbed it. So, but then that would be your responsibility. So I think in the hosted platform sense,
but if you'd screwed up your DNS, you wouldn't be serving your CSP anyway.
Oh, but if it, say you had like an old subdomain like files.troyhunt.com, still pointing at Azure like random address, and someone had snatched that because you'd let it go.
So your CSP, if that included subdomains, would then protect the subdomain from being used for other purposes?
No, but that's where security.txt would come in to contact you, because you'd accidentally let this subdomain go. They would need to contact you and not Ghost.
So I guess maybe it's a question of sort of the bits and pieces that you take, because for something like, very often we're using content security policies because we're worried about reflected XSS. And reflected XSS is something that shouldn't be able to happen by your own cock-up of a theme. It should be a platform-level mistake to make, right? But you could always have like DOM-based XSS, I guess, and screwy JavaScript that reflected
you could do stuff like grabbing query params, or...
People do all sorts of stupid shit.
If you give people power, they'll find a way to screw that up, right?
And in fairness as well, there are bits of CSP such as upgrading secure requests, which I think are super, super cool.
Yep.
But having said that, I've still got a CSP on troyhunt.com. I just can't add it via the header anymore without doing your tricks. And give me the link to it later on, and we'll put Scott's tricks in there. I just serve it via a meta tag, which, all right, it doesn't protect things before the meta tag appears in the head, but it does 99% of it. And then I use the report URI JS feature to be able to hook into events and then send the reports. And we'll link to all that.
You should do it with the worker. It's just easier.
Did you get security.txt working? Because I think you tried something, then you said you had a problem with it.
So Ghost were, because it's in the .well-known path, I think maybe they were just like ban-hammering all requests for a path that starts with .dot, which is like a fairly good security stance. So I just got back in touch, and I presume they've just opened up that one, .well-known. Right. So that now works.
Okay, so I will put a security.txt on troyhunt.com. Because I think sort of regardless of how much it is or is not necessary, and I guess my argument is still that it's not quite the same as like have I been pwned where every line of code is written by me and I'm responsible for 100% of it. But the ease of implementation is so low, and this is what I love about security.txt. It's like it's a text file. So.
I think the other part is probably that you're a security person.
I know.
And you kind of it's like, hey, this thing's really good and you should use it, but Troy doesn't. Well.
Moving on. Troy will. Let's Encrypt. So there was a change to Let's Encrypt this week, which you wrote about. It's sort of maybe philosophically significant. So do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, I mean, so they announced the change this week, and basically when Let's Encrypt began life, kind of like just over 3 years ago now, they were actually a cross-sign CA, and this is going like a little bit PKI, TLS nerdy, but they're a cross-sign CA, which basically means another CA gave them their CA power, and it didn't necessarily come from their own organization. But they're 3 and a bit years into that process now.
But the cross-signing bit being that they also signed as well, right?
Yeah, so another organization called Identrust gave them basically an intermediate and said, hey, go be a CA and here's your intermediate. And they've been using that since day one to issue your certificates, my certificates, everybody's certificates. But now their own actual route is widely enough trusted by all of the major platforms that they're like, hey, we can go from this cross-sign one over to our own actual root CA now. So I wrote this article about it, and I do a 2-day course on TLS and PKI, so I can go like super deep on the TLS nerdiness. And I was like, I just want to write something.
And it is the world's best TLS training. You can come and do it on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, in 2 weeks' time from now.
Do my course. Anyway.
Don't start stealing my people again. So, yeah, like I could super deep dive on this and go like right into the nitty gritty and everything, but I just wanted to write something really quick, high level, so that most people could kind of understand it. And essentially, from a technical perspective, it really doesn't change anything. There's a couple of people, if you have like really old backwards compatibility concerns, like, hey, I want Windows XP Service Pack 2 to work on my website.
Yeah, you have other issues.
Yeah, like this.
if you're in that position.
There's other things that we can't help you with. But there is this like super old client backwards compatibility thing, so I just went through like the really basic points, and that was kind of the goal, right? To try and keep it like above the depth of information. And so many people came back to me, and there was a couple who were like genuine people, friends that I know, and they're like, hey, you said this thing, and like maybe, it's not quite right. And for example, I was like, your Windows operating system needs to do an update to learn about this new thing. And most people's minds, and my mind, when you say that, goes to Windows Update, right? Windows has to do an update. That's Windows
Yeah,
Update.
but it doesn't
There's
have to.
actually other update mechanisms in the background outside of that. And I'm like, right, but that's not like, I'm not trying to split that hair.
Yep.
Windows needs more information, and I use the word update, like, and it's
You,
kind
you
of
used
hard
it in
sometimes.
a very generic sense.
Like, yeah, and I totally get that. Some people were genuine, and they were just like, hey, maybe there's an error, and you want to correct that, but so many people just pile on, and they're like, oh, well, this part isn't like technically accurate, and I'm like, right, but if I want it to be technically accurate, I need another 1,000 words in the blog post, and that's not the point that I'm trying to make.
So you pitched it at an audience that would be broadly consumable and didn't go deep.
Yes.
And then a whole bunch of people went, you missed this stuff because you didn't go deep. And you're like, yeah, that's kind of the point.
Essentially.
All right, so, I mean, that's you're like, we're just not going to solve that problem here. I guess the sort of the key takeaways are, for the vast majority of people, it will make absolutely no difference whatsoever because they will just get a new cert after, what was it, July 1?
No, it's like July 19 or something.
July.
Like that. Yeah, July.
So that they'll, their Acme client will fire up. They'll get a new cert. It'll last for another 90 days. It won't be cross-signed anymore. It'll just be signed by Let's Encrypt root.
This is where things get
geez,
really
we're
funny.
gonna-
Technically, nothing will actually be any different. It's just the intermediate they return via Acme. But yes, everything will be as you said it was.
So basically,
level.
stuff won't break unless you have some really funky, weird, old
stuff.
clients.
Yep.
But mind you, if you were back in that era, actually, did Windows X? No, I think all of Windows XP, certainly with Internet Explorer, never even had SNI support as well. So if you're that far back, if you're using SNI, then you're not using.
Probably won't work anyway.
Well, it's not working anyway. Unless you're running, this is what we used to do. I remember we used to run Chrome on Windows XP because we still had Windows XP for a ridiculously long time in Pfizer because of reasons. And we just run Chrome because Chrome could then load websites that had.
Chrome could load web pages.
that's
It's like,
crazy.
oh my gosh, a feature in a browser.
Takeaway is understand your audience and understand if there's a significant enough segment that doesn't recognise the way these certs are going to be served come July, whatever the date is. Maybe like funky old. I
The
remember
death bird's coming.
everything that makes noise here will kill you. I remember dramas. Oh man, I had a classic drama back in my corporate days where people rolled out POS terminals, and this was just before Poodle hit, the Poodle bug. You remember Poodle sort of killed SSL3, so this was 2014, October 2014. We just rolled out POS terminals in pharmacies in Hong Kong, and I remember specifically saying to the vendor, it's like, these can do TLS, right? Keep in mind, TLS landed in like 1999 in the first iteration of it. And they're like, we'll have a meeting and get back to you. I now know what have a meeting means. So anyway, and I remember because I was in Seattle and Azure killed support for SSL3 because, and I think people like Cloudflare were the ones that killed it really, really early. And then others followed, and Azure eventually followed.
And the POS was the
and they're like,
client.
no one will be using this anymore. And the freaking POS couldn't do TLS; it could only do SSL. So suddenly, I don't think you can get in trouble for saying this. Suddenly, all these guys in Hong Kong trying to go and get their discounts on Viagra. I worked for Pfizer. We make Viagra. Yes, I know it deals with relationship things. It's okay. We're all adults. Mostly. Anyway, the point was that they'd go to the pharmacy, they'd try and redeem their coupon. Viagra is one of the biggest products we sold, along with Lipitor and Zoloft and things like this. And they wouldn't be able to get their discount points and things like this because the vendor had literally not built in TLS support, and then they wanted to charge us to build in TLS support. So I guess my point is that there's always going to be like weird, funky edge cases when it comes to things like crypto support for TLS.
Yeah,
as well.
for sure. And in that scenario, you would need to do something. And the funny thing is, like, you have to fully resolve if you have those client issues, you have to fully resolve them by like September 2021, because then the fix will stop working as well.
Yeah, but then you got like 2.5 years to.
Yeah, hopefully,
like
that.
If you're still on XP, then sorry, you deserve it. Like that's. Mind you.
Throw 'em in the ocean.
Win 7 is going to be very much off support by then as well.
Isn't that next year?
Yeah, unless you're paying very large amounts of money. So, here we are. All right, so next thing. We're going to blow a bit of time on this one.
Troy's new watch.
Troy's new watch. My daughter's new watch, which you're not really going to be able to see it on the camera. It got very, very scratched up within about half an hour of her wearing it as well.
It's not Gorilla Glass.
No, it is. It is not Gorilla Glass. Did I say Gorilla Glass?
You've had like
I've had like that much beer. It's not even strong beer. All right, so look, let's talk about this. This was a really big story. It's had a lot of press. You and I have been discussing it a lot. Yeah, have a play with it. So the backstory is Saturday before last, Ken Munro from Pentest Partners, who we both know pretty well from the UK, very, very straight shooter. Pentest Partners is a very, very reputable firm. They're very, very, don't take my SIM card. They're very, very well known for finding vulnerabilities in all sorts of various things, including IoT things. And they've got a bit of a history of finding vulnerabilities in things like smartwatches. So what this is, can I have that back for a second? So, what's that?
That's such a terrible screen, it's ruined.
I know. Look, again, it did ship with screen protectors. I didn't put them on. I didn't think I'd need them like half an hour after my daughter put it on. We'll get back to that shortly. So, Pentest Partners has tested a whole bunch of devices like these. Now, these are kids' tracking watches, and the value proposition is, and we'll sort of be fair and balanced about this and then talk about why it's maybe not something that we like. Value proposition is parents are worried about where their kid is. Maybe the kid's been kidnapped, maybe the kid is just still at school and they haven't walked home yet. Maybe the kid is, I don't know, like whatever kids do these days. And by having one of these with a 3G card, obviously with GPS as well, once you've got 3G, you've got the ability to send data, send geolocation, etc. It gives parents some peace of mind because they can see where the child is. There's also a button on here which can do an SOS. I'm not even sure which one it is. We never actually, never tested that on here. As you can see on the back, if I hold up to the screen for those of you who can catch it, there is a little SIM card slot here as well that pops open.
It's definitely not any kind of water resistant, is it?
Well, this is what I was wondering. It looks like there's a little bit of a rubber seal in there, but I really wouldn't trust this to survive days in the pool. So anyway, features like that, there's the ability for a child to call the parent, ability for the parent to call the child, and then the parent has a companion app which would run on the phone like that, and then they can see the location of the kid and all this sort of thing. So it's sold in Australia under the TikTok Track brand. It's sold in other countries under different brands. Now, all of these devices, as you can see from the front screen, do actually say Gator. Gator is a Chinese brand manufactured in Shenzhen, like a lot of things are. Look, my iPhone and my Apple Watch, and my iPad are all manufactured in China as well. So that's not really the issue. Where I think that the issue begins is that there's a lot of leaning on the Australianness of the service. And you've seen the blog post, you've seen the site. Everything from the data, this is an Australian idea. The data's hosted in Brisbane, which is just up the road from me here. A lot of leaning on the Aussiness. And I kind of found it weird when I watched the video. So there's a media clip from a few years ago where a lady's kind of launching this. And the media clip's very much like, Brisbane mum, I don't know if they used the word invent. I don't want to be disingenuous to the lady as well, because it was very much a media, here's how to position the thing.
Yeah.
But sort of represented it as like it's an Aussie invention from a local mum trying to look after her kids. It is a Chinese watch. It's made by Gator. A bunch of different companies use it, and then they wrap their own services and their own app around it, and their own branding. They don't go quite so far as to wrap their own branding on the front of the watch, though, which I did find it a little bit odd. So anyway, this is the device. Now, Ken reached out to me and he said, look, we have been testing a bunch of these devices in different parts of the world. He sent me some links to some of the stuff that they'd done in late 2017. I'm going to send you a link to my blog post. It's got all the details in it. And they just found egregiously bad flaws. And as I started digging, we found things like a Consumer Protection Authority, you'll see it in the link, I forget the name of it exactly. In Norway, went and tested a bunch of these and just went, look, that they just shouldn't be on the shelves. Germany was like, no.
Banned.
Ban it outright. And in fact, they literally said, destroy them. Now, I've since learned that effectively the position there was that because these can be used as surreptitious listening devices, this is what sort of crosses the line. It's not so much that it's a watch for kids that has GPS and 3G, it's the fact that it can be used as a silent listening device. So destroy your child's watches, destroy your child's teddy bears with listening devices in them, if there's any Cloud Pets owners out there. All of these sorts of things. And that the more you dig, the more you find consumer protection groups just going, this is a really, really bad idea. And I think you probably had the same reaction to me when we first saw this and went, nah.
It's hard to convey how this thing feels, but it is literally like...
And in fairness, it wasn't even in feeling, it was seeing the value proposition. And what it boils down to is the fact that the child's every movement is being captured and stored on the internet. And we just know how this works out because we've seen it a gazillion times before. We have seen firsthand so many times how these devices have flaws all over them. And regardless of how many statements there are about we take security seriously or this sort of thing, and there is a statement that says we take security seriously, this stuff just never works out well. So anyway, Ken said, look, I need someone in Australia to order one of these watches. Can I help him with that? It suits you.
It's beautiful.
Very sweet. What if you can get it? You could get it in black. Actually, they do sell them for the elderly as well. So, you know, maybe at the other end of your journey, there'll be an opportunity for one of those. And the value proposition for the elderly is, you know, like grandpa's losing his mind a little bit. We'd like to be able to track grandpa because he does go for a wander sometimes. So we get one of these. It actually, why does it fit your wrist if it's made for a little kid?
Because I'm so slim.
Anyway, so Ken said, you know, can you get one of these? I ordered it on Saturday. It arrived, I think, on Tuesday. I put it on my little girl, Elle. So Elle's 6 years old. We said, look, I'll be the typical parent. She can be the one who is the typical child, and we'll go through this process. And Ken was very, very straight around all the ethics of how they test. So there was a lot he wanted from me in terms of consent and permission, even though we all know each other pretty well. So yes, you know, everything totally straight. So he did the right thing, absolutely 100% of the way. We then went through and discovered that he could actually go through and do things like fixate the position of my daughter, so that when I looked at the app, I'm expecting her to be at tennis, and he's put her in the ocean off Wavebreak Island, which is, you know, not ideal. Probably even less ideal would be if she really was in the ocean off Wavebreak Island, but it was showing her still at tennis. I mean, mind you, then you could just take the watch off them and leave. Wouldn't you do that if you're a kidnapper? Wouldn't you go, oh, this kid's got a tracking watch, I'm going to take it off? Because you can't miss it, come on.
I know, but that could just be like a terrible, you know, like, you know, the old school Casio watches. You'd have to know. Like, you'd really have to know. But you could, like, you know, yeah, you could just like...
Anyway, the point is you could chuck it away anyway. So, you know...
Implant it.
He managed to set her position. Now, like, let's just talk about the vulnerability for a second. So the vulnerability is an insecure direct object reference. It's sort of like, it's just the canonical web security 101 vulnerability, isn't it? It's like, oh, look at that URL. It says get user ID equals 1. And then you go, oh, I wonder what would happen if I changed to ID equals 2. Oh, look, it's a different user. And it's
classic.
It's just the most inanely simple flaw. And the concern that you have about that is not just that the flaw exists, but if it's so low hanging, what degree of testing was actually done?
But not only that, like, what degree of testing was done? But for me, it's like, who else has found this? That's the other thing that jumps out to me is, if this was so easy to spot, then can we assume that you were the only people to find this?
And the thing is, and like, let's be clear, Ken found it, then I helped him confirm it. I mean, I proxied my phone through Fiddler on my PC just to look at the traffic. So all I did is just look at the requests going backwards and forwards. And you can see that there's a family identifier value. And my family identifier was about 3,500, which probably tells you something about how many family identifiers there might be out there, assuming they're incrementally, just incrementally.
And it's just an integer.
It's just an integer. So yeah, I think tangentially there's a bit of a lesson here of, if you do not want to disclose the size of your customer base, don't use integers that are publicly facing to you know. I mean, this is the whole idea of
I didn't do anything. I actually did not touch anything.
Wow, it says Dad.
I was just holding a thing.
Wow, this is like kids' intro to weird.
Oh, it's touchscreen as well.
No, it is touchscreen.
Cool.
It still is, even though it's all scratched.
We'll just leave that now.
Anyway, so getting back to the point, where were we? So yeah, insecure direct object references, and I just make the point about incrementally incrementing numbers that go up.
Incrementing
numbers that go up. So the point about the numbers that go up is that it does disclose the number of customers you have. I say that simply because when I was doing media stuff this week, one of the reporters said, look, we asked, I think it's Karen Catwall, the lady who's responsible for TikTok Trek locally, how many customers they have, and she declined to comment, which sort of implied to me she does not want to let people know. Okay, so don't use numbers that just go up by 1 every time someone registers, and then you show those publicly facing. So we know that they have about 3,500, assuming those numbers line up with the actual customers. So anyway, he's discovered that. The thing that was really freaky as well is that because we've got these IDOR vulnerabilities, insecure direct object references, on every single API they looked at, every single API is vulnerable. Now, just to be clear, it's not straight out IDOR insofar as like there's a URL and you just change the number. You do have to be authenticated, but it doesn't matter who you authenticated as. So you can authenticate as Jimbo over here, and then you can go and change like Mary's family. Like it doesn't matter. And obviously what the developers have done is like, must be authenticated to access resource. Check, job done, ship, off for beers.
Classic auth versus authorization.
Authentication versus authorization. So it's just the most well-known thing in the world of security and vulnerabilities. So anyway, one of the other endpoints there was the ability to set yourself as a parent, and effectively the demonstration we ended up doing with Vangelis, who's a Greek bloke who works for Pentest Partners with Ken, is we put this on Elle's wrist. She sat in her bed. It starts ringing, and in fact it was that number, because I just noticed it was like a +30 number or something. I haven't even tried pressing the buttons on this. I wonder what happens. Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
Oh no, here you go. I think this, see, because this says Dad. I won't actually show you this because it might be Vangelis' real number, but it's a +30. Is that Greece?
I have no
I think
idea.
it's Greece.
Probably Greece.
It says Dad. It's not Dad. Well, he's a dad, but he's not. This is like the whole auth thing. It's yes, you are a dad.
You are a dad,
but
you
you're
can
not
call
the
them.
correct dad. So what he was able to do.
3-0.
Okay, so it's Greece. So he was able to call the watch whilst Elle has it on her wrist. It rings. There's a video of this on my blog post. And then, without any interaction from hers, it automatically answers, because this is one of the value propositions where I think sort of the way it's aimed at parents is like, if your child is like bound and gagged and in the back of a truck and being kidnapped or something like that, and they can't press the button, then it will automatically answer. And I don't know,
But then they
is that it?
Then they
Well,
wouldn't
okay,
speak to you.
no, but okay. If they're just they're just handcuffed in the back of a van and they're not gagged. See, that
This
would
is
be-
like a
that would be-
really narrow set of circumstances.
But
where this is
th-
useful.
this is also the reason Germany banned them, because Germany said, well, hang on, this is a surreptitious listening device which also can just sit there and require no interaction, and it can,
Yeah,
you
no,
know, like
that's
you
just-
can see the freaky side of it. In all seriousness, when I did the video with Elle and I looked at it afterwards, I just went like, holy shit, this scares me to look at. It was really weird. And in fact, the night before, when Vangelis and I were testing this, I was working late. I work late on the Wednesdays because I play tennis beforehand. And I had it sitting here on my desk at like 11:30 at night, the lights down low, and suddenly the thing's ringing. And I'm like, oh, gee, that's a bit weird. I'll just ignore it. And I literally, hands-free, left it there. And then there's this foreign voice, like talking to, and he's got this like thick Greek accent, which sounds a little bit scary. Very nice guy. It sounds a little bit scary, if I'm honest. And it's like, who's this person talking? Oh, right. And there was a moment of really freak out.
Do you know, it's really weird because I did that talk in Manchester like a couple of weeks ago before I flew here, and it was about the CCTV camera one. And like me and Alan Woodward and a couple of the other guys were testing that, and it's like a wireless CCTV camera, 1080p video mic, and we were trying to access each other's remotely. And I got a message from Alan. He's like, "What the hell are you doing?" I was like, "What do you mean? What am I doing?" And he's like, "What is that noise in your house?" And I'm like, what do you mean, what is that noise? And then that penny dropped of like, holy crap, he's actually just sat there listening to me. Unfortunately, he was like pointing at the wall. And I was making her coffee. He could hear the coffee grinder in the kitchen. But it's like that split-second moment of we always talk about these things and be like, oh, this is a big privacy risk and someone could have listened to you. But when it actually happens to you and you feel it for like that moment when you're like, wow, this is like...
So
this
I think
is scary.
the point is, like, we live in this world, we talk about this the whole time, we see this as vulnerabilities, but when you're on the receiving end of that, it really feels
that
weird.
does. It really does.
So continuing the sort of chronology of this, and I'm actually just looking for an email here because I'm going to want to talk about what was in this. It was sent to many people, probably about 3,500 people. Yeah, so Vangelis went and sort of demonstrated the ability to call remotely. This was Thursday, my time. The next day, Ken got in touch with TikTok Track and said, look, we've got a fairly serious vulnerability. It doesn't require authentication to go through and change things. It was enough information that people should take it seriously. He didn't go through and provide all the detail. He wanted to obviously get a rapport going before he shared too much of a sensitive nature, which is quite fair enough.
Speak to the right person as well.
Make sure you've got the right person. Look, I've had this many, many times where you're talking to some support desk, and for all I know, it's like it's outsourced to someone who it's their first day on the job and they're doing 20 other things. Like, you want to know that you've got the right person before you share the details. So it was kind of interesting the way it played out from there, because that was on Friday, and I think it was Friday night, even our time here in Australia, that he got in touch with them. Obviously, he's in the UK. And we got through to Monday, and they actually just took the service completely offline. And all of us were saying, like this is really unusual, because they took it offline and they sent everyone a message. And to be clear, when you take it offline, this is no longer a smartwatch; it's a watch, right? So it can't do any more tracking or anything like this. Every single parent who tries to load the app, it just sat there spinning and just timed out altogether. And it was kind of odd, because we're all sort of saying, well, they don't know the details yet. They've sent an email to everyone. They kept using the word alleged. They used the word alleged 3 times in the email about alleged flaws. And we're saying, if they're alleged,
why take it
like
down?
I get alleged flaws for have I been pwned all the time. It's like, no, this is not a real flaw. It's that you're an idiot, or whatever else it may be. There's usually a reason for it. So far, I've been right each time. But the point is that on the one hand, you're saying it's alleged, which really is casting doubt on the legitimacy of the report, and on the other hand, they're going, oh, we've got to protect the children. Take it offline. And it's like, well, which is it? I agree it was the right thing to take it offline. So, all due credit to them. I'm just not sure why they're also being defensive.
But do you think that's just they don't really know how to kind of like deal with that and respond with it properly?
And this is where I think it gets really interesting, because we've seen this a gazillion times as well. The one I really remember is the AA in the UK. I think I was over there in the UK, and remember those issues where they're like, no credit card details were taken, and we're like, wow, this is credit card numbers.
Yeah, because it was like in the XML or the... Yeah,
it was all over the place, and then I ended up doing that like 5 stages of data breach grief. So, yeah, we do see this a lot, where organisations don't know how to handle the situation. Now, if I think about organisations that have done a really good job, organisations like Discuss and Images, so I disclosed their breaches to them within 24 hours, full disclosure, they've done the right thing. They're kind of tech companies though, and I get that. The Red Cross in Australia, Red Cross Blood Service, is consistently quoted around the world as being like the best breach disclosure ever. But I went to AusCert, who actually knew how to do this properly, and they managed the process. When we look at bad breach disclosures or bad handling of them, think about CloudPets. CloudPets was an absolute mess. They couldn't even get in touch with the guy.
VTech as well. Did they do well?
VTech had their hand forced. So VTech's a Hong Kong toy maker. So someone found a SQL injection vulnerability. In fact, I think it was like SQL injection and IDOR as well, a whole bunch of other things. And this guy, I assume it was a guy, we never end up knowing who it actually was, wasn't confident that they would handle it properly, so he sucked all the data out and then sent it to Lorenzo at Motherboard, and then Lorenzo sent it to me. And here's what sort of got me, actually, and we'll touch on this for a bit too. That was the wrong thing to do, because he had all of these other people's data. It wasn't just like one other person to test whether it's legitimate or not. It certainly wasn't with consent like we did with Pentest Partners. It was his millions of records. And he says that he did that because the company wouldn't take it seriously otherwise. And I hate the fact that people are doing this, but then I hate the fact that we get organisations like TikTok Track in this situation that are downplaying the severity. And what I hate about this whole thing is that it drives that behaviour, which is the behaviour to take all the data out and do something nasty. There are API endpoints on here that have insecure direct object reference risks which return customer data, first name, last name, email address. They could have pulled out, let's say for hypothetical reasons, 3,500 records, and literally just gone to town and said, hey, Troy, here it is for have I been pwned or something like that. And there would not be any more allegedly. Yeah. And that would be the wrong thing to do, but I can see why people get driven to do that. It's
but then
it's
like
a
I was
bad
going
situation.
to say a minute ago, like, okay, so you do that to VTech, and then like, is he just going to zip up their database and send it to them to get them to take it seriously? Like, how does that give you the leverage?
So the way it gives leverage is he gave it to a reporter, because once it's in the media and it's all over the press.
Just like, couldn't you just give his record and one of the persons to a reporter?
Yeah, you could.
Is that?
And really, that's the right thing to do, isn't it? And even that one other person's record, strictly speaking, is probably going to be breaking CFAA and all sorts of... is breaking CFAA. But you're probably not going to go to jail for one other record as well.
Or just create 2 accounts and...
Well,
pull out.
And this is the right thing to do, which is effectively what we've done here, where I created the account and they went, okay, we'll see if we can access that. Anyway, we're sort of going from a bit of a tangent, but the point I want to make is that it's bad responses from organisations that are ill-prepared, which also exacerbate bad behaviour from people who are then so used to seeing this shit that they respond in ways which are inappropriate. Speaking of responding in ways that are inappropriate, so they took it down on Monday. Kudos for that. They do deserve credit for that. The problem is they've then made a few comments which weren't real bright with the benefit of hindsight, and I hope that their hindsight tells them this as well, because it's going a little bit Streisand effect. So
God.
they sent. Well, actually, let me do the in chronological order. I did a bunch of different radio interviews yesterday. For some reason, this just went really big on radio, but then not as big on like TV or the internet. But be that as it may. In one of the interviews, they said, "Look, we interviewed Karen, and she said, Troy's just got a vendetta against IoT." Now, I didn't hear that quote from her. That's hearsay. I'm yet to hear the actual interview. If that is the case, and it would be consistent with some of the other communication I've seen, that's really not a good response. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, as Ken mentioned when he and I chatted about it later, he said, well, I've got a vendetta against bad IoT. So, okay, well, that seems pretty reasonable. I think we would all have that. But
yeah.
that is a good vendetta to have against something that puts anyone at risk, particularly kids. That's a reasonable vendetta, not a bad thing in this case. So there's that. The other thing is, as you said, like you're sitting here looking around going, just how much IoT do you have in your house? And then I'm like, there's a coffee machine, that's got a wireless switch. The wash, I still don't know why I got the washing machine on the internet. It's all VLAN. But yeah, I've got a lot of IoT. You've got a lot of IoT as well.
Yeah.
Like we love IoT. We're geeks and techs and all that at heart. But if we find something wrong with it, we really want the organisation to take it seriously and fix the damn thing as well.
Yeah.
So, that was not a smart statement to make. The other thing that wasn't real smart about it is it is obviously intended to be deflection. So we are, I'm putting myself in TikTok Track's shoes now, they're responsible for this really egregiously bad security risk that never should have been there in the first place, should have been easily found, could have been exploited without knowing it. We'll come back to that too. And then they're saying, oh yeah, but Troy's got a vendetta against bad IoT. How does this make sense?
I mean, it is just like, look at the thing over here. It's literally just
misdirection.
Straight up misdirection.
So then there's also a message just from yesterday titled Service Interruption, Update 1. At 3:45 on Monday, 15th of April, in response to an email from Ken Munro from Pentest Partners, we restrict all access to TikTok Track. Every TikTok Track is an R as well, by the way, platform. This was done to ensure the well-being of all our customers while we investigated the validity of security flaws that he communicated to us. So far, so good?
That sounds reasonable.
Now, just note, of security flaws that he had communicated to us. No punctuation. Next para. Mr. Munro, which is Ken, finally supplied us with the details of these flaws. Single quotes. No, there's literally quotes around it. Now, I don't know why there weren't before and there are now, but obviously the intention here is, again, to cast doubt.
On his
and by this time, he had provided full POC, proof of concept details about how the thing was exploited. It would take about, I was going to say 5 minutes of Googling, 60 seconds of Googling to work out who he is, who Pentest Partners are, who I am, and to see that we do have a bit of a track record, and generally we're nice people that have done a good bit of work out there. So, this just, it isn't cool because it downplays it. Yeah. The other one that I think, again, this is just, it's just immaturity in terms of InfoSec awareness on behalf of the company. We would like to reiterate that to this day, there has never, in bold, been a security breach that has led to our customers' personal data being used for malicious purposes. Now, what they mean to say is that they are not aware of this ever having happened, and that may well be true, but that is not the same as saying it has never happened, because you think about the vulnerability. A user who is let's rephrase that. A user who is authenticated to the service, so someone who is genuinely logged on, manages to access the account of someone else. That's going to be a difficult thing to log and identify. Well, actually, let's rephrase it. The likelihood of that being logged and identified is extremely low. And if you were of a mindset, I'm blue skying here, if you were a developer and you're of the mindset that, hey, just in case someone ever actually gets authenticated as one person and manipulates the record of someone else, wouldn't you think just not to have that vulnerability in the first place?
I was just wondering where you were going with that, because I'm like, hey, we should log the IDORs. It's like, nope, you should just not have the IDORs.
They just don't have the IDORs.
Like, yeah.
No IDORs. Well, this is honestly the takeaway from this. I don't understand. Well, I do understand. It's an illiteracy problem. It's an InfoSec illiteracy problem. So Ken has got in touch with them again and said, look, you really want to rethink your communication strategy. This ain't our first rodeo. We've done this many, many times before, and every time an organisation behaves like this, it always ends up at some degree of bad. Every single time.
And not through like hostilities necessarily. It's just, like once they start putting things like this on Twitter and people catch wind of them, like that usually draws like a little bit of a response from the wider community, right? Because it's like, well, hey, these good people are doing good things, and this company's just trying to slam on them. So,
well, this is the thing. So there's definitely there's a few things. So there's definitely a lot of support from the information security and the technology communities in general when they see an organisation not behaving the right way with one of these things. The other thing is that does have a way of getting more media traction, which of course is very Streisand effect, right? It's like, hey, you know, as soon as you start talking about something and saying that it's not a thing, everyone's going to be looking at it. I just had to find this quote here because this was epic. When Ken and I were chatting about this, he said, look, when he was communicating with the Gator distributor in the UK, and this goes back a while now, and they had all these problems, he said, you wouldn't believe one of the things they said. I'm going to read you the comment here. You're sitting down. You've seen it. UK agent for Gator said that they didn't have the money for security as otherwise they couldn't afford a staff Christmas party. Now
they probably said that hoping it'd be off the record, maybe.
I did ask Ken. I said, "Look, are you okay if I reproduce this statement in my blog?" And he was okay with that. I did put that in a tweet as well. The UK agent for Gator replied, not very happy about it, and said things have been misrepresented. Ken chimed in and said, "Are you really sure you want to go down this path?" They went very quiet after that.
Let's just dump the email.
So, look, I guess to start wrapping it up, it's where to now. So I'm just going to check my email. The message yesterday with the update said it would be back online today. It's 5:15 in the afternoon on Thursday now.
That's a pretty tight timeline, right?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that as well. We're going to go longer than I expected. So I don't have an email from them saying it's back online. I haven't checked. I could check on my phone. It is a tight timeline because you think about what's got to happen. They took it down on Monday, which is 3 days ago. Now, what do you got to do in 3 days? You've got to go through every single API endpoint and fix the IDOR. Now, that may be something that they can do at some level of abstraction where they do it once and it applies to everything. It may be something you've got to do on every single endpoint. It's definitely something you've got to test on every single endpoint. And definitely one of the things they've got to do, and they have said they're going to do this as well, and they clearly didn't before, is actually get a pen test firm to test the damn thing. Now, there is a pen test firm who has tested it. They did it for free. They're called Pen Test Partners. But they need to go out to someone in Australia. There's some good ones here. I can recommend some if you would like them. They're probably not going to ask me. And it's not that I would ever do it. This is not my thing. But, you know, there are good ones out there. And they would go through this thing and they would test it properly. They're not going to get it fixed and tested and pen tested within 72 hours. Like, it's just not going to happen.
You won't be able to engage a firm in that time. Like, full stop.
The other thing is pen testers ain't cheap either. Certainly not ones that are decent. And also, just to add another layer on top of this, and we hadn't spoken about it here, is that it looks like, and we haven't heard anyone reputing this yet, but it looks like the work was outsourced to a company in Sri Lanka. I'm not sure what the turnaround is like when you contact Sri Lanka and say, hey, you know that software you built for us however long ago, and you put all the flaws in, we need them fixed. Oh. Also, and this is where I am a little bit sympathetic to TikTok Track as well, when they engaged to get the software done, they didn't expect to have this flaw. Like, they would have paid this organisation in the subcontinent to do this work with the expectation that it'd be done properly. So I would be really trying to screw these guys on price and certainly on any sort of ongoing service arrangements or anything like that. So that might be mixed in with all the other discussions around how to fix it.
And that's a tough one, right? Like, I can see that, you know, they've just sat down and been like, hey, we need this software to do this thing, written up a, you know, spec of what it is, given it to them and got an app back that works in an API. And you know, where do we slide the security knowledge into that?
They would have picked up the phone and gone, oh, wow, it does work. You know, like, everyone's happy, here's the money. So they've got to talk to that company as well. So I guess where it leaves us, and this is a question that's come up a bunch from people since this has been in the news, is would you ever get these devices for your kids? Which ones are safe? I've had multiple people send me messages asking about different brands and saying, well, is this one safe or that one's safe? This one is safe. This is an Apple Watch. They're bloody expensive and they're made by a company worth about I think they're just under $1 trillion now. That actually does serious testing. And I put this in the blog post because it's, you know, an Apple Watch is a very non-trivial purchase. I think the cheapest one you can get into is $500 something, and then you need an eSIM if you want to have any sort of remote access for all the kids out there, and you need a companion iPhone, which I still think is a pain in the ass, but it's another story. But the point is that if you expect to go out and spend $200 or $300 on a cheaply made device, don't expect it not to have serious risks. I'm not saying that okay, I would never buy them. I'm not saying to parents that they should never buy them. I'm saying you need to weigh these up. It's like there are these two sides. It's like I can get this watch for cheap and I can track where my children are. The other side is some weirdo somewhere else, like in a country called Greece or something like that, might also be able to talk to your child or track them or something like that. Are you okay with that? If yes, and you're proceeding with full consciousness, great. But you can't just sort of go, oh, well, this company says they take security seriously, we're going to do that. And you know what it's like, how do you even tell when you look at a company's product and you look at the promotional material until you start pulling the thing apart? How do you know if it's any good or not?
And this is the thing I was literally just thinking then, right? It's like, hey, this woman's built this company and outsourced the development, and they didn't know like where to insert security, and they built this product, and now we're passing it to the consumer, and the consumer's going to sit there and think like, hey, where do we insert security and check this thing? It's like this whole thing has failed at like every step, and even just like generalizing on the type of product now. How would a consumer look at that and make sure that was secure? And how would they think about it without having seen this news story? Like, go back to last week, would anyone have thought about this?
Other than Ken?
Well, yeah, and this is the problem.
Well,
right? Like
the answer to that is yes, people would have, and it goes back to your point earlier on of how many other people found this flaw and then didn't disclose it.
Right, but the average consumer's just being tracked and listened to, and they would have never thought, hey, is this watch secure, and can random weirdos on the internet follow my kid?
But honestly, even when you think about you and I, if you and I go to a website, people sort of say, well, how do I know which website to trust? If you and I go to a website, we have no idea whether or not they're going to have a data breach later on. Like we've got no, because would you have gone to LinkedIn or Dropbox or Adobe or Yahoo and gone, nah, these guys look sketchy? I'm really sympathetic to consumers, and I am sympathetic to companies like TikTok Track as well, that think that they can sort of pump these out at a cost-effective price and cut corners, because it is a much more complex industry than that. All right, so I'll update people as we progress. I'm sure something will have happened between now and the next week, and we can talk about what's happened to it in that period of time. So last thing, I know this actually went a lot longer than I expected, and we do have to go out and drink beer tonight as well, so yes. We have that responsibility. Sponsorship this week is from Twilio. So Twilio is talking about Authy. Authy obviously being something that you can do your 2FAs with and integrate into your apps. You and I certainly turn 2FA on absolutely everything.
Everything, and I use Authy as well, actually.
Yeah, and you use Authy as the client. Of course, Authy also does the integration if you're an app developer as well. I use Authy as well. In fact, it's literally here on my watch.
That's so nice.
Yeah, it's really cool, actually.
Oh, look, I have an Apple Watch now.
Yeah. Now that
I've come up in the world.
Now that you've crossed over, you can do that. No, so you literally have every single thing there. It's quite neat.
This is so awesome.
So go and check out Authy from Twilio. Big thanks to those guys for the sponsorship. And we'll come back next week. We'll give you an update on this fella and a whole bunch of other stuff before then. And lastly, again, just over here, over the road canal, same thing here. We do have NDC security in just over a week from now, so we're going to keep pushing that and provide some links to it. And thanks for doing it, mate.
See you there.
See you.